protein per pound of body weight. Ectomorphic possibly need more. And that's what I would say, start first with ectomorphic. If you're a hard gainer and you have a hard time putting the muscle mass, try immediately with a higher protein intake. So for ectomorph, I would go already with 1.5 and quite possibly even as much as 2 grams of protein per pound. This is the amount of protein that I also recommend to competitive bodybuilders. This whole Secrets of the Pros diet nutritional segment, it's for average sedentary person, not necessarily competitive bodybuilder. So when I said that 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, that was not only for bodybuilders, that is for everyone. Now for competitive bodybuilders, we need a higher protein intake, and for ectomorphs, 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Endomorph, as I said before, has trouble losing weight. And still for the endomorph, I would keep very high protein intake and then reduce other macronutrients, carbohydrates, and fat. So even for endomorph, I would suggest 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Not necessarily 2, but 1.5. As you can imagine, when we set the diet, endomorphic people would have a low fat intake and low carbohydrate intake, so something has to be high, and the safest nutrient out of those 3 would be protein. So 1.5 gram of protein per pound of body weight, even for endomorph. Mesomorphic people are fortunately very muscular. It's the best type if you want to be a competitive bodybuilder. We have even 8-time Mr. Olympia Lee Haney, who would claim that throughout his career he only needed 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And Lee Haney is very well respected, great athlete, great gentleman, wonderful person all around, but he was very well known for his nutritional knowledge. I attended some of his seminars, and I talked to him personally many times. He believes that if you're mesomorphic and you train very intense, you can get away with 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and he did, winning 8 Mr. Olympia titles. So I don't want to say it's impossible. I would not exclude that possibility. So mesomorphs can try with the 1 gram of protein per pound, and if they're not getting desirable results, then they can increase maybe to 1.5 or in between. So protein intake for those 3 types I mentioned here, and I wrote it during the break. We were taking that 200-pound person, and as I said, we started with 200 grams of protein. Carbohydrate, I decided to put, like this example, between 100 and 500 grams, for different body types. And fat in between 30 and 100 grams, also depending on the body type. So here was an endomorphic person. You have a trouble losing weight, I would give you 100 grams of carbohydrates for start. So each and every one of you that is watching this DVD and you're designing your nutrition program right now, if you believe you are endomorphic, start with the 200 grams of protein and the 100 grams of carbohydrates. Okay. If you are mesomorph, very muscular, I would put you on about 200 grams of carbohydrates. Same amount of protein. This is 200 carbs, 200 protein. If you're mesomorphic, but you're very active, I would increase this from 300 to 500. If you're extremely active, you can go as high as 500. If you train twice a day, on top of that you have some kind of physical activity in your job, you possibly need even 500. If you're mesomorph but you're very inactive, then you should stay at the 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrates range. If you're ectomorph, very high metabolism, very hard gainer, you can't really gain muscle mass for the life of you. Probably some of that protein that you're taking, your body is converting into the carbohydrate for that energy that is needed, so your body doesn't have enough protein building material. That's why you should go as high as 500. This is just, general, like this overview. because goal of this DVD is I want each and every one of you to come up with the exact diet by the end of the DVD. So we were talking about protein intake, important to have sufficient amount of amino acids floating in our system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that at any time we have amino acids or protein available for all the physiological and metabolic needs. I established 1 gram per pound for average person. If you are a bodybuilder, competitor, you should go higher. So endomorphic, as I said, can go, there was 200 grams of protein, 1 gram per pound, and as I suggested, up to 1.5 gram of protein. That's 300 grams of protein. If you're endomorph, you're not training, bodybuilding is not your interest, you just want a healthy diet, 200 grams of protein. If you're endomorph, but you still want to try to build some muscle, not necessarily to compete, but want to get some muscle going on, 300 grams of protein. If you're endomorph and you really want to become professional bodybuilder, you can go as high as 400 grams of protein. So we are talking about endomorphic person has a trouble losing weight. You can take 100 grams of carbohydrates and between 200 and 400 grams of protein. 400 if you want to be competitor at the sooner the better, the fastest possible time, 400 grams. If you are just a bodybuilder that trains and want to have adequate amount, 300. And if you're just the average person that doesn't necessarily need to compete or build muscle, just want to have a healthy diet, 200. That's endomorphic. We are moving on to the next person, mesomorph. So those are the bodybuilders kind of blessed, genetically that from their parents they got the genes to be very muscular to begin with. Those are lucky ones, but as I usually start with 50% protein, 50% carb for all of my clients. If you're just mesomorphic, but you don't have a competitive goals, you don't even really train, you're just an average person but want to get in shape, 200 grams of carbohydrates for start with the 200 grams of protein. If you, however, want to become a bodybuilder, start training, you can go 1.5 gram of protein. So now mesomorphic person is going to take 300 grams per pound. 300 grams a day, 1.5 gram per pound. And if you're really thinking of competing, then you should go as high as 2 grams of protein per pound, 400 grams of protein total daily. If you're ectomorph and you have a really hard time gaining muscle mass, I would say that immediately you should start with 1.5 gram of protein per pound, and very soon I believe you're going to realize that that's not enough. So even ectomorphic person is going to go immediately to the same range, 300-400 grams of protein. As you can see, the difference is in the carbohydrate. Ectomorphic is going to have so much more carbohydrates, but the amount of protein, as you see, pretty much all three types would have between 300 and 400 if they are training. If they're not really interested in a muscle mass increase, they're just sedentary individuals that do the normal job, 1 gram of protein per pound could be sufficient. That's a protein intake. Carbohydrate intake for a mesomorph is if active mesomorph, you should take between 300 and 500, inactive between 200 and 300. So how do we do this really practically when I do the diet for somebody? Let's say that ideally we have a minimum 5 meals a day. That's a minimum. It can be actually much more, and I do prefer to have more than 5 meals a day. So here would be protein, carbohydrates, and fat. If you take in consideration 200 grams, then 5 meals a day would be 40 grams of protein, right? However, if it's 300 grams, there will be 60 grams of protein. And if it's 400 grams of protein a day, that would equal to 80 grams of protein per meal. Here's now another problem. There is a myth going around that only 30 grams of protein is a magic number, can be assimilated in one sitting. And that's exactly what I said, myth. There is absolutely no proof of anything like this. But I heard it so many times I have to mention it because I'm sure that this is coming. How much can human body assimilate in one sitting? I certainly don't want to recommend necessarily to take 80 or more, but to answer that question, absolutely, positively, body can assimilate any amount. As I was talking before, what happens with that protein? Your body has to break it down, and it's hours-long process, unless it's some dietary supplement like whey protein that is much quicker. But your body has to process this, break down, digest, assimilate, and everything else, and this is a long process. So when you eat that 80 grams, let's say, of protein, of, let's say, steak and eggs in the morning, it will take you hours before your body's going to get amino acids from that protein. So don't be alarmed and say, whoa, that's too much. But to make something much easier for everyone, if your required amount is high, 400 grams of protein, then obviously 5 meals is not enough. We can maybe add in between few more. And ideally for this, I would have let's say, 50, 60 grams of protein and have additional meals in between, which could be protein shakes, meal replacement drinks, anything that is convenient for you that it's possible and realistic to expect that you can maintain so many, let's say, 5 solid meals and 2, 3, 4 shakes. So if you're going with the 400 grams of protein as an extreme, that's professional bodybuilders and anybody that is considering competing and getting really a lot of lean muscle tissue in the shortest period of time, high amount of protein, up to 2 grams per pound is what I recommend. If it's 400 grams of protein, let's say you would have 50 grams in 8 meals. So we can add it like this, 6, 7, 8. I'm hoping that I'm not losing you here. 8 meals, 50 grams of protein each meal. 50, 50, 50, 50, so on, all the way to the end. That is extreme. That is the hardest case scenario. 200 is much easier, as we said before. 300 in between. I'm going with the hardest. It's going to be really easy for you to adjust the number. So if you do want to be a professional bodybuilder and beat Ronnie Coleman next year, you want to, besides qualifying and all that stuff, that's not really that complicated to do. This is more complicated. 400 grams each and every day, continuously, constantly, this is what's going to get you results. This is not something you can do one day and then have 2 days off, 3 days on, 2 days. Protein is constant. I mentioned that for many years, I was on 500 grams of protein daily, continuously for 20 years. And today, as we speak, I'm still on 500 grams of protein. My protein intake doesn't change. Carbohydrate and fat changes. Pre-contest, off-season, doesn't matter when, protein intake is constant. And for you, if you want to be a competitive bodybuilder and you want to go 400 grams of protein, find the easiest way how you can intake 400 grams of protein in, let's say, 8 meals. I was talking about various protein sources. Interestingly, a good friend of mine is Charles Poliquin, a great strength coach, not one of the best, I do believe, the best strength coach in the world, and he's also a nutritionist, and he does a lot of tests for various athletes. Interestingly, he tested for food allergies in several athletes, and what was really disturbing to find out, athletes get allergic to exact food they are eating constantly and continuously. So, for example, I was tested, and at that period of time I was on high protein intake, and my protein choice was mainly chicken, and I tested allergic to chicken. I stopped taking chicken for a while, and 3 weeks later, I went back and I showed no allergy, for chicken. However, I was now allergic to beef, as I was eating beef constantly. And then the same process happened. Is every time I would get off a certain food, I would normalize. But then I tried to do something different. I start mixing the proteins, and to this day, I do believe that this is the best, the most logical way of doing it. I would have a different protein source every time. So let's say I would start with egg whites, then would have a chicken, then would have a fish, then would have a some steak, let's say dairy product, cottage cheese, or some form of casein and so on. And in between, I would have a protein shakes. Even protein shakes, I would vary. I would take whey, fast absorbing protein post-workout when I need quick amino acids, and I would go from whey concentrate to whey isolate to whey hydrolysate, different types of whey. High molecular weight, low molecular weight, doesn't matter. It's always mixing, so you never let body adapt to anything. So source of protein would be different throughout the day, and I solved my problem in a sense of food allergies. So as we're designing now diet for everyone, consider this. Instead of just chicken, try to mix and match. Go with different kinds of protein all the time. Turkey breast, very good source. Wild game, phenomenal. Ostrich, buffalo, emu. There's many great sources, many different seafood choices. So high protein intake is what I believe the biggest problem for all of us. Training is not as demanding. The biggest problem that I have with many athletes is following the diet and maintaining high amounts of protein day in and day out. So this is really, if you want to be a competitive bodybuilder, this is the must. Minimum 300 to 400, and I would say go with 400. I really believe that 2 grams of protein per pound is what it takes. So that's protein intake. Carbohydrates, as we were talking about, we take it as energy demand. In the morning, as soon as we wake up, of course, there was a certain amount of hours that we were sleeping, we were inactive, and at that time, our body would, as we sleep, still use energy, deplete our glycogen storage, so we would wake up in the morning, and more than likely, we would have a low energy due to 6 or 8 hours of use of glycogen as we were sleeping. So first, I would take some complex starchy carbohydrates in the morning to give us some sustained energy.